how the people are doing. So yeah, this camera comparison, definitely something that I'm quite excited about because, well, not only are these two phones newly launched, and well, technically this is the first Motorola and the first Google Pixel phone that I'm getting to use. Usually because these phones just either show up late or don't show up at all in India, but anyways. Looking past that, there's also a major price gap between these two. This one costs 60,000 rupees and this one is around 85, I believe. I think I got it for 80 with some discounts, but yeah, for the most part, that's a price gap and it's a pretty major one. So, the Pixel has a lot to prove. Is it really worth that extra amount of money? At least in terms of photography. That's what we'll find out soon enough. So let's jump right in. Okay, so we are starting off simple right here. As you can see, the major difference is that the Pixel 7 Pro has more contrast and, well, of course there's a general brightness difference as well. The Moto is very bright compared to the Pixel. Personally, I like how the Pixel looks. Of course, personal preference, as I've said in multiple camera comparisons. Contrast, colors, that really just depends on what you want from your cameras. But the S30 does have a feature that I wish every single camera has, especially when it comes to high resolution, because the S30 Ultra will basically use smart high resolution depending on the lighting of the situation. If there's enough light, it'll take a 50 megapixel shot by itself. You don't have to do anything, you just need to turn on the toggle. And well, cropping in, as you can see, yes, the S30 does have more detail, but it looks really over sharpened here. Now, the thing is that the Pixel 7 Pro has amazing processing, and I've said this before, it can sharpen things a little too much sometimes, but in a case like this, it's holding up its own with a 12 megapixel image compared to 50. And if anything, I would go so far as to say that Pixel actually looks better because it doesn't have so much sharpness haloing happening. And then zoom is also an area where both of these phones have a lot of differences, especially even in the ways that they approach zoom in general. So in this case we have 2x and the S30 Ultra has a 2x telephoto, so obviously you get the optical quality. It looks very faded and the contrast is a little off, white balance is not quite right, but the detail preservation is there for 2x. The Pixel goes for the sensor crop, and I mean, I think that the image looks far better in this case. It's not framed perfectly, that's my bad, but the image itself looks far better with the contrast and just the white balance going all together, and the details, because of a sensor crop, looks really nice as well. At 3x, the S30 crops in from the 2x telephoto, so the details are not lost too much. It is still a partial digital zoom, but the Pixel goes for a software trickery where it'll use a 5x telephoto to basically give us a much more detailed, centralized area in the image, while the edges are obviously still not as sharp as you'd hope, because the 3x digital zoom is there. But yeah, it's an interesting approach, and I would say because of it, most of the image on the Pixel looks as detailed as the S30, although the edges and basically the periphery of it will not be as detailed. At the moment you go to 5x, the Pixel will take it from there because it has the 5x telephoto zoom and it is a very high quality zoom at that. So it's gonna look really nice. And then for 10x is just to show off the sensor crop once again. It's a very clever situation to use sensor crop because it gives you both 5x telephoto and a 10x sensor crop, which is basically as good as telephoto. As you can see here, it looks near flawless on the Pixel. But then what about HDR? Honestly, I thought there would be a much larger difference between the two, at least in this case, because this is a very difficult situation. I couldn't even see the photograph that I was taking. The sun was really that bright. But if anything, I would say that I like the S30's sky color a little bit more than the Pixel, because for the most part both are looking really nice here. This is a sunset shot, also backlit, and as you can see, of course the white balance is different in both. I like how the Pixel looks. I feel like it is much more natural in terms of how the scene looked when I shot it. It's not too far off on the S30, and if anything, I would say the S30 actually has more shadow detail, so that's something I really like. And then for an ultra wide shot, once again backlit by the sun, and I mean, look, if there's an HDR situation, you really don't have to worry about it because it looks really nice on the S30 Ultra, as you can see. Now personally, I like the look of the image on the Pixel 7 Pro, the higher contrast, the colors in general, it just looks better to me. But then on macro, well, this was kind of surprising for me because as you can see, the S30 Ultra can get closer to the subject compared to the Pixel 7 Pro, and it does give us a very nice and naturally detailed image compared to a very processed look on the Pixel, which I'm not always a huge fan of. Sometimes it looks good, but in macro photography especially, it can look a little bit too crazy. And moving on to 200 megapixels. Now this is where obviously things get very interesting for the S30 Ultra. This is by far the only smartphone that I've used with 200 megapixels, and it does keep expectations really high. Now, the Pixel doesn't really have a high-res mode. I cannot fathom the reason as to why it doesn't have high-res, because I'm pretty sure it would do a phenomenal job if it did, but it doesn't. And well, as you can see, with 200 megapixels compared to 12, the S30 does pull ahead. But from personal experience and from a previous camera comparison I did with the X80 Pro, I can tell you that the 200 megapixel mode is nothing to particularly write home about. I would say other stuff about the S30's camera, like its HDR processing, is actually a much bigger deal than the 200 megapixel, even though I understand that such a high megapixel count can sound incredible, on paper at least. And then moving right along to the selfie as well. This was in pretty warm light, as you can see, once again in a similar sunset situation as we saw before, and I like the Pixel here. The colors, the skin tones, it just looks right. It is definitely quite saturated. Something about the skin tones on the S30 looks a little bit off, just a tiny bit. Probably if I wasn't seeing this side by side, I wouldn't be complaining about the S30 here. But then this is mildly backlit. And as you can see, the S30 is screwed it up here, and it screwed up for a few images. I took about like 4 or 5 similar results, and of course the Pixel is looking flawless here. That's an impressive shot, and I really like the way the skin is represented. You know, it has a warmth from the sunlight, while the S30 is kind of making it look a bit more red. Now for a fully backlit image with the sunset sun in the background, that sounded a little odd, but regardless, the Pixel, needless to say, is doing an incredible job. You know, it's stuff like this that you really pay the extra amount of money for, you know, the processing and the fact that it can hold its own in a crazy situation like this, while the Moto tends to fall apart as you'd expect. And then here's a portrait mode shot, and this was a really warm situation. I mean, you can see the warmth on the Pixel 7 Pro. I mean, I like situations like these, you know, they can really challenge the cameras quite well, and it's very clear that the S30 Ultra cannot handle that crazy amount of warmth that's falling on my face. It's making it look a little too red. We saw this in a previous normal selfie as well. Here's another selfie portrait, and this one's situation was a little bit easier compared to the previous one, so you know, both are much more closer this time around. I do like the warmth on the Pixel compared to the more red hues that we're getting on the Moto. And the moment we go for a backlit image, of course the Pixel will hold its own, as we saw before, and the S30 can't really do that. Now, night mode selfie. Now, this is a feature that the Pixel has, so obviously it is doing a phenomenal job here. You can see that it is giving us the right colors, the contrast is great, details undeniably incredible there. But I also want to mention that the Pixel goes a little bit wider with the selfie camera. That can be really good for group selfies. And as for selfie portraits, well, it actually looks not terrible on the S30, except for the fact that we have this weird blue coming in from the left side. It's kind of ominous if you think about it, but yeah, the Pixel, it is giving us a much brighter image. I wish it had more contrast like the S30, but yeah, for every other aspect it does take a win, because it is a night mode portrait selfie after all. Now for rear camera portraits, well, this is not a portrait shot on the Pixel 7 Pro, but you can actually add portrait blur after the fact on the Pixel, and that is sort of like a workaround on the Pixel to kind of negate that retarded little crop that we have. I don't know why it exists in portrait mode. It's also present on the S30 Ultra. Again, no idea why that exists. It makes no sense to me. It just deteriorates image quality, and well, this is a way to work around it. But unfortunately, the edge detection really takes a hit on the Pixel if you go this route. You get a better detailed image, but the edge detection is worse. So, you know, you gotta keep that in mind and basically pick your poison, in a manner of speaking. Now honestly, just putting the edge detection aside for a second, I like how the image looks on the Pixel. Now this is a regular portrait shot on both, and yes, both of them cropped in a little bit. I don't know why, but well, I do like how the S30 Ultra looks here. You know, the skin tone saturation and the contrast, it looks really nice. There is a bit of a magenta tint going on. It's probably from the sunset, as usual, but yeah, I would say it's doing a really good job in this case. As for 2x portraits, well, it is only possible on the S30 Ultra, because despite the fact that it is giving us a fairly flat looking image. I wish it had more contrast, but the pixel, as you can see, it is extremely processed. I mean, it does not look nice. And yeah, well, this is what happens when the camera by default crops in for no fathomable reason. But of course, the pixel also gives us night portraits. Now, depending on which one you want, you're really gonna have to choose between these two. If you want 2x zoomed in portraits, proper usable portraits, then you would want to go for the S30. But night portraits, as you can see, it's a clear choice on the Pixel 7 Pro. Speaking of which, let's go for regular night mode shots. And well, I must say, I kind of expected this difference to be present, but it would appear that the S30 Ultra has a fair bit less lens flaring. While on the other hand, the Pixel, with more lens flaring, it does manage to have far less noise in the sky especially. It's far cleaner on the Pixel compared to the S30 Ultra. You probably won't be able to see the difference on YouTube after compression and everything, but the noise is definitely present on the S30. This is an ultra wide shot. This was fairly dark. Don't be fooled by how much light we can see on the Pixel. It was much darker, and that's also why we get a sort of muddied up image on the S30 Ultra. The details on the road, some of them look a little too faded. The saturation is just completely gone, the white balance is off, so all of it put together, the Pixel is doing a really good job with processing the image here. And well, we also have this image. I mean, well, I don't think I have to say that I prefer the Pixel 7 Pro. I don't think anyone realistically would want that much saturation on the S30 Ultra. Now granted, you can reduce saturation in post, it takes like 2 seconds to do that, but I'm just saying, straight out the camera, the Google Pixel 7 Pro looks far better, and this kind of consistency is again something that you pay extra for, and that's what you're getting from the Pixel. Here's another main camera shot, and this time we had a little bit more light coming in, as you can see. And well, I think the S30 just, it goes overboard sometimes, and sometimes it just cannot handle the situation well enough. I think that inconsistency is basically its downfall in cases like these especially. It looks fine on the S30, but clearly the Pixel looks better. It looks more balanced, it looks a lot like nighttime, I must say, and the contrast just looks right. Now for ultra dark, ultra low light situations, the S30 has a terrifying problem with focusing. I mean, this was probably a very easy subject because the Pixel focused on it immediately and I just took the shot. The S30 on the other hand, it would not focus on it. Whether I use tap to focus, whatever I do, I move the phone around, nothing would make it focus on the flash. And well, that's unfortunate, but yeah, the general brightening power is obviously better on the Pixel. It does handle the noise, the details better compared to the Moto S30 in general. Using the ultra-wide camera in similar crazy low light situations, I mean, do I even need to say that the Pixel pulls ahead? Obviously it does. That's kind of the thing with more expensive flagships. They can handle themselves in more adverse situations. But having said that, how many times do we take photos like these? I mean, the most that I can think of that I generally take are backlit shots in broad daylight. Especially with the sun in the background, the sunset shots. And those the S30 Ultra can handle. It's mostly the low light stuff that it can't handle, and that's sort of like the sacrifice for paying far less for the S30 Ultra. And that brings me to the main point of this camera comparison. Are you getting a good enough camera from the Pixel 7 Pro to justify that price point? I would say it depends to a fair extent, because the consistency on the Pixel, the way it can really bring out the contrast, the details, the white balance, I think it's going to be important for a lot of people. It's something that people would want to pay extra for, but let's face it, the slight inconsistencies on the S30 Ultra, it doesn't really deteriorate images all that much. Comparing side by side, it definitely does make the Pixel look a lot better, but in real life usage, you're probably not going to be bothered by it all that much. So I do hope you enjoyed this camera comparison, found it helpful. So drop a like if you did, let me know how you feel about these devices as a whole, and I'll be seeing you guys soon enough. Cheers!